This man has taken One Piece by the story balls and is now threatening to become one of the most impactful figures in close to 3 decades worth of fictional pirate adventures. His name, Vigilant Garling. His power, maximum. His hair, luscious. And his motivation, to purge the weak and those who assist the weak, which very much includes his own potential spawn, Redhead Shanks. And in this video, we're gonna go over how, why, where, when, and maybe even some other question words if you're very good and stay until the end. Saint Vigilant Garling is our new Elder Star. And just on that, I'd like to start by clearing up some star-planet confusion. If you only read the scans, you'll know that they made the bold decision to translate Gorosei as 5 elder planets, after 27 years of them being the 5 elder stars in the official translation. And to be fair, that made sense for about a minute, as each of the 5 old men was named after a planet. However, the planetary designation makes a lot less sense here with Moon Boy Garling being here. And this is because in Japanese, the kanji sei, the one that we find in Gorosei, can mean pretty much anything in space, commonly used to refer to stars, planets, and even satellites. The most literal way to translate it is also the most vague and boring sounding one. It would be the 5 celestial bodies. But basically, it's a pun in written Japanese that doesn't translate too well into English. However, I do wish that the scans hadn't actively gone out of their way to, quote, correct the official translation, especially now that Vigilant Garling's ascension to the position comes with his first straight-on shot, where his hair makes him look like a bright, shining Elder Star. And the most clever part about this is that story lord Eiichiro Oda purposely kept this angle from us. He didn't show Garling straight on until he became an Elder Star. So his star hair is debuting here in all of its old man glory. And what we have to assume from here is that Garling is the new number 5. What we learned on Egghead Island by using our eyes is that there is an internal ranking system within the Elders, one that is depicted on their demonic portals. And Saturn's position was number 5, indicating that he could have been the youngest or even the weakest of the Elders. The only other number we've had confirmed so far is Marcus Mars, who was number 4, and it's been extrapolated from there by fans on the internet that Topman Walkuri is number 3, Ethan Baron Venustro is number 2, and Old Man number the 1st is actually Saint Shepherd Jupiter, which would be interesting because he is both the youngest looking Elder Star as well as the one who was most visibly shook by Garling's promotion. But here's why Garling sends a genuine shiver down my personal spine. If there is anything I've learned in this series, it's that old men can never be underestimated in One Piece. The older they are, the more afraid you should be, because there's a reason why they've lived this long. Even Garp and Whitebeard, well past their prime, were practically unstoppable until they were stopped. And Vigilant Garling is a member of their generation. A generation so packed full of legends that historians struggle to keep up with documenting them all, even having misplaced a whole God Valley incident. Whoops. And that is the event that turned Garling into the legend he wasn't to the beast he is today. To address another translation issue, there's a common misconception that Garling was called the champion or the ruler of God Valley, and this was actually an initial mistranslation by Viz, which was corrected and later changed to someone who distinguished himself at God Valley. And very importantly, there's also the theory that Garling is the one who scarred Whitebeard on God Valley. In chapter 434, Whitebeard and Shanks meet, with Whitebeard stating, "When I look at your face, it makes my scars ache. The scars I got from him." And previously, I'd always thought that he was talking about Roger, but Garling, he makes infinitely more sense. Shanks' face reminds Whitebeard of Garling because adult Shanks looks exactly like Garling did in his youth, sans moon hair. And if Whitebeard was scarred by Roger, then I think he would wear that quite proudly. But Garling, there is no pride there. He's a very different kind of dude. But one who fought on the same level as the Roger, as the Garp, and as all of the Rocks. So any reverence we have for them should be equally as applied to Garling. Except that Garling now has one absurdly important thing that elevates him from even those legendary names. And that is the pact with Imu, which is more than likely how each of the 5 elders receive their transformations and, more importantly, their immortality. This is yet to be confirmed at the time of this recording, but this is probably the way it goes. And I say immortality instead of perpetual youth because they do seem genuinely impossible to kill unless you're Imu. But this removes the main debuff that Garp and Whitebeard valiantly carried upon their rapidly decaying shoulders, which is age. Their bodies just didn't function the way they used to because of all the sickness and the old man aches and pains. But Garling doesn't have that problem. With what looks to be infinite regenerative abilities, there is little to nothing anyone can do to stop him. Garling's one weakness has now been removed. And he also doesn't have the weakness of the other 4 elders. One of the things that I said repeatedly about the elders during Egghead Island was that they all felt very rusty. Each of them possessed world-class power, but they had lost the muscle memory and the sharpness of mind to really put it to use. On his way to Egghead Island, Saturn even muses on how long it's been since he set foot on the surface. But as the commander of the Holy Knights, Vigilant Garling doesn't come with those problems. He hasn't had the opportunity to kick back for a couple of decades decades and get comfortable. So Garling is the best of all worlds at the moment. The pinnacle of power, the pinnacle of form, and the pinnacle of experience. And I think there is an argument to be made that he could be the strongest character in the world at this very moment. Especially since what we potentially have here is the raw strength and haki mastery of a Shanks combined with Imu's abilities. Having brought up haki, Conqueror's haki seems to run in family lines. The One Piece world is extremely nepotistic, and look, if your father was a cock user, which is color of Conquerors, then you are either genetically or socially dispositioned to be one as well. Being raised by a Conqueror will make you someone more likely to awaken that than someone who was raised by, say, Michael and Huayco from the back streets of Water 7. So Shanks could be either a predisposed Conqueror due to being raised by Roger and being flung into fight battles against the Whitebeard pirates before he was even double digits, or he could be genetically predisposed thanks to his potential father and or other type of family member, Vigilant Garling. Either way, I cannot imagine a relative of Shanks being any less than him skill-wise. However amazing we think Shanks is, that should apply to Garling as well. And with regeneration in mind, Garling being past his prime becomes more or less irrelevant. Old age is halted, and if the status of the old men bodies was a problem upon receiving immortality, then Imu probably would have selected some younger candidates to begin with, like Jupiter to be fair. But Elder Star candidates are likely chosen from the pool of Holy Knights. My current theory being that the Holy Knights are like Elder Stars in training. The idea being to make them the pinnacle of human strength before graduating them into the realm of demonic powers. Because one theme we do see pop up in One Piece from time to time is the idea of characters being granted overwhelming power out of the box and then just sort of coasting with those powers, never truly pushing them. The typical example would be NL, who has a devil fruit that could make him practically invincible, but settled on the idea of calling himself a god far too early and was brought down because of it. Imu cannot afford to have people like NL. They need to earn their godhood before it's granted. The Holy Knight system would also give candidates experience dealing with internoble issues, giving them authority of world noble society, and thus preparing them for the decision-making position of an Elder Star. That's why the 5 Elders reach so strong. They achieve the apex of fight power in their mortal lives, as well as prove their loyalty to the world government / Imu, and can now be trusted with even more power. And so they're given one of the 5 roles that Imu sees as most essential. And that would explain why the Elders honestly kind of suck at their jobs. If they're hired based on strength and seniority within the Holy Knights rather than aptitude for their designated fields, then the mess of a planet we live in is easily explained. However, for most of history, their mismanagement could have been easily hidden by increasing the tribute tax paid by world government nations to just go ahead and pay those mistakes away. But here's the thing, I don't think that Garling is going to suck at his job. Garling's opening statement to his newfound fellow elders is that they should do their best to make the world a better place, which is all good and well, but it's entirely dependent on what Garling's subjective interpretation of the word better is. The Vigilant family are quite an oddity within world noble society, a family that didn't quite blend in with the rest, and the other elders are visibly put off by Garling's presence as their equal. I don't think they believe that Garling's vision for a better world necessarily coincides with theirs. Garling in his youth is portrayed as quite arrogant, which, to be fair, not at all uncommon for a world noble. It would be more of note if he wasn't, especially since Garling actually had the power to back up his arrogance. But even 38 years before he became an elder, Garling was acting like he was above each and every other world noble. In the God Valley flashback, he almost seems bored by his life situation. Cursed to live among these lower level gods, if you could even call them that. And when Garling was introduced to us, his very first line of dialogue was, "Stand up for subhuman scum and you'll sink even lower," which was directed at the then very dead Saint Mosgard. But it also serves as the direct counter-philosophy to Shanks, who goes out of his way to protect the very weakest in this world, even elevating them to become part of his grand fleet. And this philosophy of Shanks may very well be inspired by Garling, knowing what his father is and the desire to separate himself as much from Garling as possible. That, or it might be the other way around. Garling is so disgusted by Shanks' determination to protect the weak and lower himself below them that Garling's beliefs have become even more harsh and radicalized, or a combination of the two. All I know is that if Garling had even half the ambition of Shanks, then his eyes will not be content with Imu's feet. He'll be looking up and up and up until he sees a neck that he can slice to claim power. Vigilant Garling was flagged by Oda as one of the 12 candidates to claim the One Piece, and I find it so difficult to see him simply being a loyal agent to deliver that treasure to Imu, not after Vegapunk's words about the person who finds it being able to change the world. It would seem that whoever finds this One Piece treasure can now affect change with even more power than Imu, and so Garling could see this as an opportunity to give Imu a good old Australian booting. And sure, that sounds like a bad idea because of the whole killing Saturn incident. You don't want to do bad things against Imu, but also we don't know nearly enough about Imu's powers to fully judge that yet, nor have we we officially confirmed that Garling has entered that pact? Personally, I hope he hasn't, because I think this is a great opportunity for us to see how it works. And really what this whole situation reminds me of is Yuri Gagarin, the first human to journey up into outer space and who reportedly said, "I see no God up here," which apparently isn't actually his quote. It was something another cosmonaut said later. Doesn't really matter though, I still like the quote. And what if Garling follows in those footsteps, becoming the first mortal to reach this upper sphere in centuries with every intention of being loyal to this God that he's told exists, but then he reaches the sacred point expecting to see God, and Garling is unimpressed. At this stage, we're in a bit of trouble because the Holy Knights are much more loyal to Garling than they are to Imu. They might not even know that Imu exists, whereas they've spent their whole lives serving alongside Garling. And now that he's an elder, he arguably has the most powerful influence amongst the 5 elders, especially after the recent failure on Egghead for the other 4. Who wants to listen to them? They suck. But assuming he did remain loyal, and I do think this is a big if, but we're gonna do it. Assuming he did, who is Garling set up to fight at the end of the series? Given that he has a sword, Zoro was always the natural choice, but mate, he already has like a billion end of series fights to get through. You got Shiryu, Mihawk, Ethan Baron, Venus Jiro, and some people are even still hanging on to Fujitora and now Garling. I know he's a beast, but Zoro can't have all the fun. Without a betrayal, I think Garling is currently most set up to fight Dragon, maybe? Since Dragon is the one who's emphasized that the Holy Knights are going to be the most problematic aspect to deal with within his plan. And in that case, Luffy and Shanks would become like kids in a playground yelling, "My dad can beat up your dad," except they'd both be rooting against their dads and wishing them both mutual destruction. And you know what? Garling could even be the one responsible for the inevitable, probable incoming death of Shanks, killing his own son out of disgust for all this helping the weak business. And it could even be a situation where Shanks is fighting the Blackbeard and even winning, but oh no, a Moon Man appears to ruin everything, or a different kind of monster man. Because Garling will now very likely have his own transformation. Depictions of Garling taking on Saturn's spider form do exist in hilariously low effort images, but he probably won't be Saturn's yokai, if only for the reason that Oda would never miss an opportunity to draw something new. And there are so many yokai to choose from. And even beyond that, he might not even be a yokai because Saint Shepherd Jupiter isn't. At the moment, what I'm seeing a lot of is the idea of a werewolf being a fan favorite due to being moon related. I'm not sure how much we should be reading into the moon as a sign of his powers though, because I don't think that any of the other elders are particularly planetary related to their yokai. Several of them seem more related to their roles as warrior gods. Jupiter, for example, the warrior god of agriculture, becomes a giant worm, and worms, they are very useful in agriculture to dig and aerate the soil, allowing much more water to sink in. You know, it ain't much, but it's honest work, like that Saturn. But look, in favor of the werewolf theory, what I will say is that the planet Saturn has a moon called Fenrir, who is of course the famed doggo of Norse mythology and a key figure in Ragnarok. So it's an interesting idea that one of Saturn's moons was promoted to his position, and we are very much heading in a Ragnarokish direction for One Piece. At least I imagine that's the goal of the world government, and if so, that would be particularly bad news for Elbaf. Of course, Fenrir had 2 sons, and if you want to descend deeper into this madness, then you could also consider the theory that Shanks has a brother. And that's who we saw talking to the elders about a certain pirate, who may have turned out to be Shanks himself. Big twist, because Fenrir had 2 sons, one representing the sun and the other representing the moon. Shanks obviously being the former, having bet everything on Luffy, the sun god, and even accidentally providing his devil fruit. And you know, some may say on the internet that Shanks' baby clothes heavily hint at this as well, because they're adorned with cute little suns and moons. But I should remind everyone that this image is not canon. This is a fan redraw of Oda's scribbles of baby Shanks that was included with the special Film Red volume, and in the original sketch, Shanks' baby clothes were completely blank. But also, Saturn has 146 moons, so maybe this whole werewolf business is just a coincidence. Also, here's something interesting that I've not really thought about before. Regardless of whether Shanks is Garling's son or other relative, Shanks probably isn't his real name, right? He likely has an original World Noble name, and he was given the name Shanks by the Roger Pirates. But wherever this goes from here, I am now every bit as excited to explore Garling as I am Blackbeard, Sakazuki, and even Imu himself. Because in such a spectacularly short time, Garling has established himself as a serious end-of-series threat, and I think that he's going to overcompensate for his 1,000 chapters of absence in a very big way. But you let me know in the comments what you think about the future of Figle and Garling.